Hello friends, my name is Ryan, and today I have a story that will send shivers down your spine, a story full of twists, turns, and mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The story I'm about to tell is called The Ipswich Serial Murders, the Suffolk Stranglers' Reign of Terror. It's one that still haunts the quiet streets of Ipswich and sends a chill through anyone who hears it. So, sit back, relax, and let's dive into the dark, twisted world of fear, suspicion, and the hunt for a killer who left the entire town in terror. It was the dead of night, and the thick fog of Ipswich seemed to swallow the streets whole. The faint glow of streetlights flickered through the mist, casting eerie shadows on the cobblestone paths. No one was out there anymore, at least, no one sane enough to be. The whole town had been gripped by an invisible fear, a paranoia that crept in like the cold that stung your skin on a bitter winter night. For weeks now, whispers had filled the air, whispers of disappearances, of bodies found in the most unlikely of places. People were too scared to even venture out after dark. The sense of safety in their small town was slipping away like sand through an open hand. Ipswich wasn't just a quiet English town anymore. It was a place where fear took hold, and trust became a luxury few could afford. But the story had started long before anyone realized. It had started in the shadows, under the cover of darkness, where no one could hear the screams or see the bloodstains slowly being absorbed by the earth. It all began with a missing woman. Her name was Gemma Adams, a 25-year-old woman who had been living her life like any other young woman in Ipswich. But one evening, she vanished. No one had seen her leave the house. No one had heard from her. Her family panicked. But in the early hours of the morning, a jogger found her body just off a rural road, her face frozen in terror. The police were perplexed. The body was untouched, no sign of struggle. It was as though she had been strangled by invisible hands, leaving no trace, no clues, nothing to go on. As the days passed, the authorities assumed it was an isolated incident, until more women began to disappear. The second victim was Anna Kemp, a 29-year-old woman with no known enemies, no history of anything that would point to a violent end. Yet she, too, vanished without a trace. Weeks passed before her body was discovered in an abandoned warehouse, eyes wide open, mouth agape in shock, her body contorted in unnatural angles. Strangled, once again, by hands that left no marks, no DNA, no answers. Ipswich was in a panic. The killer wasn't just a stranger, he was a ghost, someone who walked among them, blending into the town's ordinary life. And yet, the murders kept happening, one after another. The townspeople lived in constant fear. People didn't sleep, locking their doors, peeking out from behind drawn curtains, terrified of the killer walking right past them on the street. The fear grew as the number of victims kept rising. But it wasn't just the deaths that made everyone uneasy. It was the method. The strangulation. The lack of evidence. No fingerprints, no signs of a struggle. It was as though the killer could vanish into thin air, leaving nothing behind but death. And then came the phone calls. A few weeks after Anna's murder, the first call came to the police station. A man's voice, smooth but chilling, speaking in whispers. "I'm watching you," the voice said, and then the call abruptly ended. It wasn't the first time the police had received strange calls, but this one sent a different kind of shiver through their spines. It was a taunt. A challenge. The calls kept coming, each more unsettling than the last. The killer knew things only the murderer could know. He knew the details of the crime scenes, and each time, he would leave a cryptic message behind. It was as though he was playing a game, taunting the authorities, daring them to catch him. And that was when they realized the killer wasn't just a shadow. He was toying with them. And it was only a matter of time before he struck again. As weeks passed, the victims piled up. The killer had a pattern, young women, all living in Ipswich, all alone when they vanished. No one was safe. And as much as the police tried to piece the puzzle together, the pieces never quite fit. They were looking for a monster, but all they found were dead ends. And then, in a move that no one expected, the killer stopped. Just like that, he disappeared. No bodies. No calls. No messages. The police were left scrambling. The entire town was left in limbo. The fear hadn't gone away. In fact, it only grew stronger because now everyone wondered who had been the killer. Where was he? Had he been caught? Or was he still among them, watching, waiting for the next opportunity? A year passed, and nothing happened. Life in Ipswich returned to normal, or so it seemed. But the fear still lingered. There were rumors that the killer had died. Others said he had been caught, only to be quietly released. The truth was no one knew. That is, until one fateful evening, when a man named Steve Wright was arrested. Steve Wright, a man who had lived in Ipswich for most of his life, a quiet, unassuming truck driver who kept to himself. To many, he was just another face in the crowd. No one suspected him. But the evidence that came to light was undeniable. DNA from the victims was traced back to him. The phone calls? His voice? And the chilling detail that sent a shiver down everyone's spine: Steve Wright's truck had been spotted at the scene of each murder. But the most terrifying part? He had been in the town, walking among the victims, for years. When the police dug deeper, they uncovered his twisted obsession. Steve Wright had been living a double life, a life hidden behind the normal facade of an ordinary man. He had been planning, stalking, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His reign of terror had been carefully orchestrated, and the police had missed every clue. As the trial began, the evidence was overwhelming, yet Steve Wright still denied the accusations. He was calm, eerily calm, as though he had no emotion about the lives he had destroyed. But the truth was undeniable. He was the Suffolk Strangler. The court found him guilty. Steve Wright was sentenced to life in prison. The people of Ipswich could finally breathe again. The killer had been caught. The fear that had ruled their lives for so long was over. But even after the trial, there were still unanswered questions. What drove Steve Wright to kill? What twisted part of his mind had led him to strangle innocent women in cold blood? The police never uncovered all the details, and the answers remain as elusive as the killer himself. And so, the mystery of the Suffolk Strangler continues to haunt the town of Ipswich, a story that is far from over. Was Steve Wright the true killer, or was he just a pawn in a much darker game? The truth, like the fog that rolled in on that cold night, may never fully be revealed. But one thing is for certain: the terror that once ruled Ipswich will never be forgotten. If you've been on the edge of your seat, if you felt that icy chill crawl up your spine, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories of suspense, horror, and mystery that will keep you coming back for more. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes, the truth is darker than you could ever imagine.